Welcome, welcome. This is part 2 of my series of tips for the foundation term final at Think Tank Online. In this one, we're going to go over working with referenced scenes and building your proxy meshes. We are back in Maya, and I've set up our scene based off of this image that I was going to use as our example. You'll notice I have already set the project and I have saved the scene as master. Here I have created a render cam that we're looking through at the moment. I've added our reference image. I've scaled it up though, so this is about 3 times the size of the original image because it wasn't at 4K. I don't know if they tell us this early in the final process or if it's like towards the end, but oftentimes they will print out some of the foundation final pieces to hang at school. And I believe the resolution needs to be over like 3000 or 3500 on the shortest side. So that's just something to think about. Try to get your image maybe close to like a 4K resolution and keep the aspect ratio. I want to show you something too that I like to do that you don't have to do, but you can select your camera. Down under display options, we can change the color of the mask. So I just like to make it a little bit darker. For me, I like to see kind of like what's outside here. And I've set the focal length to 85 millimeters to start. The reason I did that, again, is because we are going based off of an image created from a real photograph that I believe was probably shot in the telephoto range. So it was probably from 85 to 95 millimeters or above. But we'll kind of see how that goes. Now, the reason I have this as a master scene, I'm going to pop back to perspective here. And this is something that I learned from my mentor that I'm now sharing with you. And so hopefully it helps. But it makes sense. In a production setting, everyone is working on different stuff, right? And we're all working at the same time. And those things are then referenced into the final render scene where things are being put together and rendered from. And what that allows us to do is as things are being updated and changed, it does it automatically within the scene without us having to go and re-import the new versions constantly, which can cause problems. Mistakes can happen, right? We might put in an older version of the object or asset or the scene itself. Things could get corrupted along the way or lost. This way, everything just kind of like flows. And so I'm trying to get into that habit myself in my own work. Also, because as we're modeling each piece of the scene in its own scene, we can do that at the origin. So we can take full advantage of all of our symmetry options, our modifiers and deformers, all of that without having to worry about things getting weird, that it's off axis or it's placed in the scene. And in our actual master scene where it's placed in place, it'll keep that position. And then any changes we need to make to the final object to fit it to the camera better is kept locally in this scene. So we can always reset it if something gets messed up. So how I would approach that is I have this scene, all of my render settings are done. I may set up the lighting here, but you could also do it in a separate scene. Depending on like the studio, it may work that way. The lighting artists would do all of the lighting in their own proxy scene, and then that lighting file would be referenced in as well as the environment file, and all the different parts. But I want to go and I want to start putting some of the main objects I need in to scale the scene. And I want to identify how many separate scenes I'm going to have. So let's pop back into the reference. So here, I'm going to just make some notes for myself. I think the fridge is going to be one scene for itself. And then all of these various props, I think these should be together because the scale in relation to each other is important and how they react to light. So we can do kind of all of these in one scene and look at them and then place them around. And I think that will include the bowl, the cereal. So all of these kind of additional props. And then we'll have the character on her own and the various things that are kind of attached to her, like her hat, her clothing. All of that we'll do together. And I think that'll be good for this one. The floor plane, because we don't really have anything else in the environment, we can do this in its own scene. So we can play around with the displacement and the look dev and stuff. So maybe we'll do this as its own. But it should be simple enough that we could probably just keep it in the proxy scene. And so in order to get going with that, I want to calculate the dimensions of this fridge. So we have them here in inches, but I'm going to want to convert these to centimeters since that's what we're working in. So our first one, we have 64.75 for our height. 32 point, we'll put 6. It's 6 and some change for our depth. And for our width, we have 28 inches. So to get these values, we need to divide by 2.54. You know, I'm just going to do it in Google so we can be quick about it. So you can just search. Of course, this is something really only for like us here in the States, but if you do find stuff from North America, right, that's in inches, you'll also need to know how to convert that back to centimeters to use. Our height is going to be 164.5. I'm rounding on that for centimeters. Our depth, we're going to have at 82. But we can say, really, we can make that 83. It's 82.8. And this is going to be 71. So, yeah, I think I want to, let's move this guy up to 165. I want to just round it off to make it easier for us. What we're going to do is I'm going to get this fridge in, and then I want to get a rough proxy for the model so we can make sure that our camera angle is correct. And we're doing that first because then I want to lock the camera and I want to export that camera in FBX format. That way I can bring it into each of the proxy scenes just to check how things are looking if I want to check against the reference camera. And the reason I'm not referencing the camera in is because I do need that FBX when we go into Mudbox to do our sculpting, because we can use our actual reference camera when we're doing our sculpting in Mudbox. So first, I would add a plane. I'm going to need this as my floor. I'm just going to take these values down. So this is going to be our floor plane. And we're also going to add a cube. And let's put in the dimensions for our fridge. X is going to be our depth, 81 here. Whoa! It's going to be huge. For our width, I put that in the wrong one. This we want to be 81. This one we want to be 71. And then I think we said 163 for this guy. Okay. So already we have a problem because this fridge is huge. So we're going to have to make some adjustments. Let's go back into our render cam. So we're going to have to scale way, way out. All right, and we're seeing something that I forgot to do before. We need to change our depth. Probably set this pretty high. There we go. I'm going to set it to 10,000 so that way we can actually see our object. I'm going to try to line the edge of the fridge up. I'm going to continue to play around with this to kind of get the camera in place and not bore you with all of that. But I want to tell you some of the things that I'm going to do to help me in this process is I'm going to make a cut into this cube. So we kind of know where that separation between the top of the door is. It'll give us kind of a better idea of where that would be. So that should help us place it properly. You know, we may need to kind of distort it a little bit in the end to fit, but I want to get as close as possible. And then we'll come back and look at putting our character proxy in. Okay, so we're back. And I want to show you a little bit what I'm doing with this size guide that I've created. So I created a cube. This is set to 91 centimeters in the Y scale. So I got that number by splitting 182, of course, which is kind of like the standard centimeter height we use for men. Puts you at around 5'9". Generally for women, I think we go for like 5'4", 5'3". For men, like 5'8", 5'9". That's kind of the standard height for a female model. It's in that range, like 5'8" to 5'9". So I used that for this specific piece because we know that it was based off of a fashion editorial. And then to help me, I've cut the cube. So this is like half of the body, right? If we were going based on 8 heads high, but even 7.5 heads, like a standard human height, 4 heads is going to bring you to like the base of your butt. And so when you're sitting, your 4th head should be flat on the floor. I'm splitting this in half to get my proportions. So first I use the knife tool and just put a split in the middle and then split each of those sections. Next, what I'm going to do to kind of get this first head into the right proportion, I'm going to extrude and I'm just going to bring this guy in. I'm going to scale it in. So I'm getting shoulders here. I'll show you what that looks like. Oh, come on. All right, let's go back into our render camera. So I set this down, the camera. This is now down to a wide angle. One of the things that's a little tricky with fashion photography is we tend to be in either extreme. You're either telephoto or you're wide angle. And sometimes it can be hard to tell which is which. Generally for full body stuff, you're going to do wide angle. And even though that gives a fisheye effect, the camera is so far back from the model that it reduces that level of distortion, but still lengthens their body and makes them look really tall. So that's one extreme. The other would be a lot of times when we're doing close-ups, so like from the waist up, portraiture work, you're going to go into the telephoto range. So anywhere from 85 to 95 as your starting focal length, sometimes up to like 120. I've seen even higher. That tends to be flattering by flattening the facial features. So I think we talked about this a little bit in our environment class when we were talking about doing cameras, right? Different focal lengths giving you different types of distortion. One really lengthens things out towards the center of the camera. One really flattens everything down. It's another good thing to keep in mind, these kind of rules of thumb with photography, because if you're doing an environment, I know I've been focused really on character art because that's what I took, but if you're an environment artist, a lot of photographs that you see, especially in like travel magazines and things, are going to be shot with wide angle because that gives you a lot of depth in the image. So I'm just trying to make sure that this is working for us. So one of two things could be going on here. Either our model is a little bit shorter than 5'9". I'm still assuming in real life she's probably like 5'8", 5'9", or our focal length isn't quite right. So I'm going to keep playing with that. But how I'm looking at this, the shoulders for one. So really we can bring these down. I'm going to grab this guy. I'm going to grab the faces because the shoulders, and again, this is kind of probably why they suggest not doing characters in foundation term, because there's a lot of these proportional things that you have to learn. The neck, the proportion of the neck in regards to the head is 2/3. So from the top of your head to the bottom of your septum, right under your nose, that measurement on most people is the same as from the bottom of the septum to the kind of pit of the collarbone. And then your shoulders obviously sit slightly above that. So these are kind of things I'm thinking about when I'm trying to get my proportions correct. I'm like, okay, so I have my head proportion, but I want to make sure that my shoulders are sitting in the right place. But already it's not quite right, but it could work when the head is turned down. So this is how I'm kind of approaching, right? Getting our scene right, getting our camera set up so I can get this done, but this is really as far as I'm taking it. Or I would kind of starting on a new project and doing this all over again. Is I would get us here. I would get my camera set up so I can export that, right? I would get my main proxies in and then I would name these appropriately. So this one is our floor plane that I didn't expand. So I would name this like floor, probably just floor proxy, right? Floor underscore proxy. This is our fridge. So I would do like fridge in camel case. So lowercase f, uppercase b. So fridge body underscore proxy. This would be like our character. So whatever the character name is, or if I'm just putting like character or girl or whatever, girl body proxy and get that. I'm also going to export these out, my main ones, to bring into their respective scenes that we're going to reference back into this. So I would get all these set up. I would group them together. So all of my proxies are in this main scene and they're grouped, and that later I can hide them. And then I'm going to export out OBJs for these because I just need the shape. We don't really need the other information for a scale. So I can then go and further refine these for each of the individual pieces of the scene and then reference them back in. So I'm going to go set up one of those scenes so we can see how the referencing back in works. I know we covered it a little bit in the Maya class, but I'm going to show you a little bit more. Okay, so now I've created a new scene. I haven't saved this one yet. I brought in our fridge body proxy mesh because this is already scaled, and this is going to serve as my proxy now that I will further refine and model in this scene on its own. So this is set at the origin. You know, I would want to zero out my transforms, delete my history. I've also separated out the doors because I'm going to need to open these, right? So I would probably also want to move my pivot. So let's snap that guy here. So then I can open that door. And now we have this ready to go. So I'm going to save. And we'll save this as fridge. Just to keep it simple, right? So that's good. Now I'm going to go back and open up my master scene. So in the master scene, let's go back to perspective. Let's group these together. We're going to call these proxies or proxy group. Now under file, I'm going to come down here to reference editor. I'm going to hit this button. This is create a reference. It's going to open up our scenes in the current project. I'm going to grab fridge. And now the fridge is in the scene. We have a slight problem, it looks like, where it's facing the wrong direction. But this is a good example of how we can change where these are at. Let's group these together so we can move just the transform of the group itself. We're just going to rotate that. I'm not going to be super accurate about it. And then if I hide my proxy group, so now I have this fridge in the scene, and any changes I make as I update it, it's going to be automatically updated in my render scene here. So this is how I would work with that. I'm also getting an idea now of where this guy is. I'm going to have to readjust him. So this is because I wasn't super accurate and paying attention to which side I was modeling as I added things on. But this would be another thing. Once we have our proxy in with a little more refinement, not our proxy, once we have our kind of main mesh in with more refinement, then we can go back, adjust the camera, right? So it's going to be a lot of this back and forth as we get things correct. But it's I guess, slightly a non-destructive way of working with our meshes. And then anytime you need to deactivate something or reload something, you can go back into your reference editor. If you want to keep the reference active and just hide that object, you can just uncheck it. Keeps the reference in the scene, but now the objects are gone. You can bring it back. If you need to remove it, you can remove it using remove reference. So this is how I would recommend working. And then I would create another scene for, again, all of my objects here. And I would reference them into this scene, or you could even reference them into the fridge scene to get them placed with the fridge so that when you reference that back into this scene, everything will be already kind of posed and placed. And you won't see that here because we don't have another scene referenced into this scene. But when you have multiple references, or you have references into a scene that's being referenced into another scene, there will be a little arrow here that you can click and it will drop down. It will show you the other things that are referenced in. And then you can choose to turn those off or keep them. That happens to me a lot because I'm not sure if you saw this, I had already set up our look dev stage. And so a lot of times I will reference my look dev stage into the other scenes, like the fridge scene, so I can work on the lighting and the materials and things in those specific scenes. So I'll need to deactivate it here so I don't have like 10 sets of lights. But this is how you would go about working with references and setting all of that up. So to keep on that, here, I've done exactly that. I have that kind of Coke liter, well, the 2 liter of Coke that we first made. I'm going to turn off the wireframe and see they're all just in the center here. So I've made that, and then I've instanced it twice, and then made these my Canada Dry and my Schweppes. Later, after I get the general rough shape of the bottle for all of them, I will convert these to actual geometry to break that instance from the parent, and then I can get them into their individual unique shapes. And then I have like this box. I just decided it was flour of this. I didn't check back at the original image to see what it actually is. But we take all of these, continuing down this line, group them, and then give this group a name, like, bottom shelf fridge door, whatever, fridge door bottom shelf group. And then we know that this is all the stuff on that bottom shelf. And we can go through as we're refining and modeling everything, doing all of our polishing. And this is another way to get that extra step of organization. But also because when we place them, we're going to want them to move together as a single unit because they're all grouped together already in the scene, right? And it gives us an extra layer of differentiation. So this is how I would do all of that. I would continue, get all this stuff like this. And then once everything is done across all of my different scenes that I've made, I would go through and start refining everything to get all of my core shapes. So then I'm in a good place to move on to polish and sculpting. So in the next one, we're going to continue working with reference scenes, and we're going to take a look at how you might set up a master material scene for your project.